A new year means new laws, and downstate pension funds will be consolidated. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Getting close to the end of the year, and we will be talking about that and what the new year will bring. With me today, Kent Redfield is back, Professor Emeritus, Political Science, University of Illinois, Springfield. Welcome back, Kent.
Good to be here.
And Dave Dahl, the hardest working man in radio, from my estimation.
Thank you.
Seeing him at night meetings and listening to him at 5:30 in the morning sometimes. WTAX Radio, Springfield. Dave, welcome.
Ho, ho, and might I add, ho.
Thank you very much. Well, a new year is coming. And January 1st is going to bring some new laws to Illinois. We had very active spring legislative session last year. And Kent, we can talk about a couple of things. Minimum wage is going up in January, $1 to $9.25 in Illinois, and then another 75 cents on July 1st to $10. That's one thing.
Yes, the legislature and the governor had a very productive session. And some of those things are now coming due. Some of them have already been in place, but with the first of the year. So everyone will be adjusting to minimum wage changes. If you register a car, sell a car, all of those things, you're going to start paying a little bit more for that.
Right, license plate fees are going up some, I think between $50 and $150. If you trade in expensive vehicles, you get more than $10,000 in value, you're going to have to pay tax on that. Some people are going to be not happy when they see some bills they didn't expect.
Yeah, and certainly in the case of minimum wage, this was a promise was made in terms of the governor's platform, and he made good on it. And elections have consequences in terms of who wins and who loses. In terms of funding the road fund, which is what a lot of the things, the driver's license, the increase on registration,
license plates.
That's the bill coming due for inaction. Regardless of who was governor, who got elected governor, we would have needed to move in terms of the backload on construction projects, infrastructure. I mean, it was more dramatic since the Democrats won and they were willing to spend more money, but this is really, you want to blame somebody, you should blame past legislators
and of course,
past governors.
Right, and of course after the spring session, the gasoline tax doubled in Illinois from 19 to 38 cents, hadn't been moved in 20 years or so. But again, that's part of the $45 billion capital program that the state passed, including a lot of road stuff, and then there's also other funding mechanisms that are coming online, including a tax on parking lots, for example, 6% for daily or hourly, 9% for monthly parking in non-municipally owned parking lots. I found out the Springfield Convention Center has a parking lot. The tax won't affect them because it's a government that owns it, but anything that's privately owned, you'll get some taxes added on. And Dave, marijuana is going to be legal starting in January too, which is a big change in Illinois, and again, something that Governor Pritzker pushed and used the Democratic majority that was in the House and Senate to get done.
It almost sounds like the simplest thing to have done would be to opt out, considering the questions of how it's going to be regulated and how it's going to be enforced, et cetera. Just this past week in Springfield, the police chief is trying to either get clarification of itself or clarify to others or both on exactly where you can do it and what you'd be doing that would be illegal about it.
Right.
So it's going to be a while, I think, before it becomes a money machine for state and local governments. And to say nothing of the fact that it was a big deal in Chicago this week with the social equity portion. If it's supposed to help people of color, how come everybody so far who has a license is white?
Right, and there was a discussion in City Council in Chicago.
It was more than a discussion; it was a gosh darn kerfuffle.
Right, but it was a long debate. But ultimately, and that was to potentially delay the start of sales in the city of Chicago for, I think it was 6 months, but that was defeated, so January 1st will also be the day that can start. And I heard Toy Hutchinson on the radio, she's a former state senator, is now the marijuana czar for the state, appointed by the governor, saying, you know, the taxes from the sales will go into a revolving fund to make loans to entrepreneurs, and if you want people in underserved areas to be entrepreneurs, you need this money in the fund, so we got to get sales going. And when you talk about opt-out, Dave, of course, cities and counties all across the state have the option of allowing the sale of marijuana or not for recreational purposes in their jurisdictions. But the law will also make it legal to own for residents all over the state. The cities can't stop that.
Right. And because we are limiting licenses and limiting growing and trying to maximize revenue in terms of those kinds of fees and licenses, there are certainly questions about exactly how much marijuana is going to be available. And history, what's happened in other states would suggest that it is probably not going to be a very, a smooth road in terms of rolling this out. And so we'll see. There just are always unintended consequences or things you didn't think about as you write legislation. Same thing happened with the parking. We put tax on parking and then discovered that it probably means, if they don't change the law, that people renting their front yard for people to park at the state fair will have to collect a
right.
a
If they
parking
park
tax.
more than 3 cars, I think the way the rules are written, although it is true that State Representative Tim Butler, who lives within walking distance of the state fairgrounds, has said that he's hoping to get some kind of a legislative change perhaps by the time the state fair rolls around in August.
Yeah, if the legislature manages to clean up everything that we passed last year, they probably will have had a pretty productive 2020 in terms of just trying to make all of this work.
Yeah, Dave, you mentioned that the police chief, Kenny Winslow of Springfield, I guess he talked to the city council about what can happen, and I guess he said you'll be able to consume marijuana in your house or on any structure associated with your house, apparently not outside, but if it's part of a patio or a deck, I guess.
He didn't specify yard, but he said that he and the corporation council, which I don't know what the difference is between a corporation council and a city attorney.
That's the fancy name they use in Springfield.
Anyway, what they worked out was that if you've got a porch, if you've got stairs, if you've got a patio, that's part of the residence. And so you can smoke anywhere in your residence. But another thing he pointed out was another maybe unintended consequence. If you've got, say, a shared porch, I'm trying to imagine what situation.
Oh, like in a duplex or something?
Duplex.
Yeah.
Well, stay on your side of the porch because I've got kids on my side of the porch, et cetera, et cetera. It sounds like it's going to be a Pandora's box of worms.
Well, it is a new day, and it's quite a breakthrough for Illinois, which has been conservative in some things and liberal in some things, but on marijuana we're now going to have this new law. And of course it was passed, and you talked about social equity and helping entrepreneurs and also clearing the records. There is a way through the bill to expunge records of low-level marijuana possession convictions that have helped people not easily access jobs or have other problems in their life because of this criminal record. And I know in Cook County they had a big event where the governor and the state's attorney of Cook County, Kim Fox, had an event where 1,000 names were presented to court to clear their records. Downstate, I believe, it's county by county, and each state's attorney is doing it their own way, but people will at least be able to apply to be pardoned from these crimes and get them off their record, which was a big part of Governor Pritzker, a lot of what he wanted to do. And he did say people of color have been the victims of the war on drugs, and he and many of the legislators who worked to pass this bill, including Toy Hutchinson when she was in the Senate, talked a lot about that it has not been equitable the way drug laws have been enforced in various communities in the state, certainly communities of color being policed more actively in this situation, or at least that's the...
And, there obviously is a trade-off between if you have blanket expungement, then two people that have identical conviction records may have had dramatically different actual criminal activity, and one may just be a simple possession, and one may have been something was pled down. And so the law enforcement community wanted, state's attorneys wanted to have some sense of control and at least considering what was going on, and that will undoubtedly result in uneven treatment in terms of people with similar offenses and similar histories will probably be treated differently in different counties. So, it is passing laws sometimes a lot easier than implementing them in the way that you intended.
Yeah. Oh, and just watching the stories about the cultivation centers coming up and the city councils at places like Springfield determining who can have a business in what location. This is going to be a pretty big change in the culture of Illinois, and we are following places like Colorado, and we'll see what happens.
Well, and if it's a tourism race, we've already lost to Michigan among Midwestern states. Not sure what kind of a pot tourism destination it is this time of year, but nevertheless, there's that.
We will find out. The governor also signed the bill in recent days for consolidation of downstate police and fire pensions. There are more than 600 funds split between police and fire departments outside the city of Chicago, which is not involved in this legislation, but there's going to be one giant fund to hold the money for police pensions and another for fire for downstate departments. Kent, this is a thing that people have been talking about for years. They think they can get a better return on investment by having more pooled resources, and Governor Pritzker got it, and the Democratic legislature got this done.
Yeah, it isn't 100% of what people were talking about in terms of consolidation, but you're trying to get better investment decisions, you're trying to get better return. It has the potential for providing more resources that are actually going to deal with unfunded liability. It does not eliminate unfunded liability in police and fire, which is a huge problem. Maybe more,
and it's a problem for local governments.
Yeah, for local governments may be more significant than this problem the state has with its unfunded liabilities, because local governments, particularly non-home rule units, have much more pretty limited options in terms of how to deal with some of the holes that they've dug themselves in. So it is certainly a positive step, but particularly from the proponents of more dramatic, some would say draconian pension reform, they look at this as almost a diversion in terms of what the big question is.
Yeah, and we're not, under the state constitution, we're clearly not reducing pension benefits, because the legislature has found that you can't do that. If it's promised to you, then you, as a public employee, then you end up getting it. Dave, the state pension funds are still underfunded, and I think it's like up to $137 billion over time, that nobody's not going to get their pension checks anytime soon, but what the actuaries say is needed over the next 50 years or whatever. And the governor just said this is the first step.
It is. I mean, I think we're done with this trying to take the temperature of the Supreme Court and write a bill that will please them. How do you like this?
Right.
Well, how about this?
Which included when they turned down the idea of cutting back on the 3% annual increases in pension benefits
and
for
state
state
retirees.
retirees.
They talk about a constitutional convention lately, which we can only ask for every 20 years.
Yeah.
And it went down pretty overwhelmingly last time.
Yeah, and so many different groups don't want to see a constitutional convention because so many different things can come up and not be controlled. So we'll see what happens. Toward the end of this year and in recent months, ethics and lobbying situations and legislators who have been investigated by the feds or are being has been a big deal. A joint commission on ethics and lobbying reform was set up with appointments from the legislative leaders and the governor. And Monday in Chicago will be the first meeting, according to co-chairs Senator L.G. Sims and State Representative Greg Harris. They are scheduled to start these meetings and come up, I think it's by the end of March, with what they hope the legislature will do in the spring. And of course, the legislative session in the spring is supposed to go through the end of May. Some people, certainly the Republicans in the minority in the legislature, have said, oh, let's do stuff right now. The governor has said, let's let this commission work and come out with some proposals. And I guess we'll have to see how real they are, and especially in a pre-holiday meeting that will come this week.
Well, I'm not sure they're, going to, have overwhelmed with an audience of people wanting to come in and comment on all of this. It is, we passed major ethics reform after the Blagojevich scandal, but it was focused almost entirely on the executive branch, and there was a lot of talk at the time that this is the problem. We need inspector generals, and we even we have long-standing one for the legislature. This is all being prompted by a huge potentially set of scandals involving legislators, involving local government officials, major Illinois Corporation, Commonwealth Edison, issues
right.
like red light cameras, contracts
right.
for various things, legislators lobbying local governments, and
right. And we know all this because of a raid on an office of a state senator in Springfield. Representative Arroyo, that was Senator Sandoval, Representative Arroyo, who I believe has stepped down, who was indicted. For
Sandoval's holding on
situation.
till the January paycheck.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
He's announced his leaving the legislature shortly, and we don't know where all this is going yet, because it is search warrants and news stories that have said what they're looking for here, and we don't know yet.
Yeah. And it was hard to get them to do ethics legislation after Blagojevich, and in terms of the legislature, it really didn't impact them. And now the types of things that people are saying, even if all of this falls through, we've got some things that look pretty bad in terms of conflicts of interest. And now we're asking the legislature to put laws on themselves, to put laws on lobbyists, and laws on relationships with a lot of actors that make big contributions to the legislature.
Right. And a lot more reporting of things just for public consumption.
This is a tough area, and we don't have a great record of major reform every time we deal with an ethics scandal.
And Dave, are you expecting big changes, or do you think they'll put out a nice report and not do much?
Well, if past is prologue, the latter. But, it's interesting that every time something happens, as these things happen, the speaker will put out a statement saying that, he's on top of it, and he's ethical, and women are respected, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of people don't necessarily want to believe that, but that's been how he's doing it. And with regard to the investigations, I'm still not clear that it's all one investigation. If it's one great big ball, or if it's something unrelated.
Right.
But a lot of it does seem to revolve around the utilities and people close to the speaker.
Right, and how Commonwealth Edison has had so many different lobbyists, and some of them used to work for Speaker Madigan and that kind of thing. So what is the relationship? It makes you wonder what can be proven if there's something wrong, or what can be alleged if there's something wrong, and we will be finding out over time. We'll see. Speaking of something wrong, Comptroller Susana Mendoza in the last week ran an op-ed in the Chicago Tribune pointing out, and this was pre-impeachment vote in Congress, saying, hey, legislators, Congress people, it's okay to vote to impeach and move to impeach a leader of your own party. And she was doing this because she had grown up in the Chicago political organization, even though she had to kind of beat the machine to get elected to the legislature for the first time. But she was, along with Rod Blagojevich, and then became, when she said she saw how corrupt Rod Blagojevich was, she was among the leaders in the legislature of people saying we need to impeach him, which ultimately was done, and he was sent out of office, expelled from the legislature, and he's still in federal prison for the crimes that he was convicted of committing.
Yeah, his hair is even whiter than yours, Bernie.
We did find out his true hair color, that's true.
White.
That's right. And but as it turned out in Washington this last week, certainly in Illinois, the Illinois delegation in the U.S. House went completely party line on the impeachment that was passed in the House of President Trump. So Central Illinois, Rodney Davis and Darren LaHood are two Republican congressmen. They both voted against impeachment. Sherry Bustos, who is a Springfield native but represents the 17th district, which actually voted for Trump, but she's over in the Quad Cities. She voted for impeachment. We don't know exactly what all of this will mean in Illinois next year.
Shimkus was out of the country, by the way.
And John Shimkus, who used to represent Springfield before the last redistricting, but represents some of Central Illinois. Yes, he had kind of fallen off the Trump train at one point, and yet apparently said in an interview before this vote that it's a sham, the impeachment, as all other Republicans are saying. But he was visiting a son of his in, I think, Tanzania, who's in the Peace Corps, and so he didn't show up for the vote. And he has announced he's not running for re-election. Kent, is impeachment going to have a big effect in districts in Illinois? Obviously, some politicians are making them an issue where Democrats replace Republicans in northern Illinois in the suburbs. And obviously in the 13th congressional district, we'll have to see where Rodney Davis is running against Betsy Dirksen Londrigan, and Rodney Davis, who said he couldn't vote for President Trump before 2016 election because of the Access Hollywood tape and the way the president talked about women, is now a strong supporter of the president and says impeachment is a sham.
Yeah, Trump was going to be a big issue in the 13th district, regardless of whether the House voted for impeachment or not, and I don't think this particularly changes it. You never know when you get into these things if there are surprises. Nobody expected that there were secret tapes when we started investigating Richard Nixon after the Watergate scandal. But barring something dramatic, then I think this reinforces the narrative on both sides about that the president is either he's a good leader and I support him and you should vote for me, or the president is a terrible leader and we need people in there who are going to oppose him and his policies, and so that I don't know this changes a lot of votes, not knowing how it's going to play out, and clearly when Blagojevich was impeached and the time that Comptroller Mendoza was addressing, Blagojevich had no base within the Democratic Party. He was as unpopular among Democrats as he was among Republicans, and that is just not the case now. The Republican Party is the party of Trump. The hardcore base is apparently will support the president regardless, and so it's a very different time, and there were not a lot of courageous votes, I don't think, in terms of the Blagojevich impeachment. There may turn out to have been some courageous votes cast yesterday. There may be some foolhardy votes cast yesterday, and it's hard to say at this point.
Right. Well, things looking ahead to the new year. Early in the new year, Dave, the Senate President John Cullerton has announced he's stepping down. We're going to see an election in the Senate of a new Senate President. That'll be a significant move.
Supposed to be Sunday the 19th.
And Kimberly Lightford, Don Harmon, L.G. Sims are names that are floated out there. Any guess, or do we think that the Democrats will come together and use their strong majority just to smoothly name someone? As we know, in some elections for Senate President in the past, there have been many ballots before things were decided.
May have to be, but in the year 2020, do you pick a middle-aged white guy to lead the Senate?
Well, it's an interesting way to put the question, which may
I wouldn't
indicate
think so.
that Kimberly Lightford, a longtime member of the Senate, who's already in leadership.
Yeah, she's the majority leader.
Yeah, and of course, L.G. Sims is African American, used to head the appropriations staff before he was named to the House and then got into the Senate.
When we had the last opening before Part of the contest was demonstrating as a candidate that you can raise lots of money to shower on your colleagues who may have tough Senate contests. And Don Harmon has raised a lot of money over time and has moved a lot of money into his committee to show
I believe I think he loaned himself $100,000. I think he's a lawyer.
Lightford has not been as active on raising money in similar ways, but apparently in the last month generated $650,000, which is close to what Harmon was showing. Right. And so that may, if the concern is about raising money, that seems to be less of a concern. It is interesting at this point, there does not seem to be, with the exception of one particular union, there is not a lot of labor money, and the biggest driver of Democratic politics in Illinois is labor, and so we don't know whether whether they have will indicate formally or informally, whether they've got a preference in terms of that context.
I haven't gained access to any of the 4 caucuses. They won't let me in, but. The thing that strikes me about Senator Sims is he hasn't been a senator very long relative to everybody else.
Yeah, although he was on staff for a long
He was
period
on
of time,
staff,
and,
right.
and so he's very, I think, popular within the group, and we'll see what happens. I will just say it is the holiday season. The usual Christmas lights on the dome have not been there this year of the State House because the dome had to be inspected because it turned out there were some leaks or faults on the outer dome. The inner dome is underneath that. The outer dome is the one that has that kind of gray metallic look. And so there might have to be a fix, and apparently they don't want to mess things up by stringing those lights. So this year goes without a tradition in Springfield. Dave, people are probably unhappy about that.
I imagine they are.
But they'll have to.
and the jokes almost write themselves if this is symbolic of state government, that it not only is it rotten from the inside, but the shiny outside seems to be deteriorating.
Well,
also.
We don't necessarily want to end on a note like that, but we will. Kent Redfield and Dave Dahl, thank you. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Happy holidays, Happy New Year. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the new year on CapitolView.